you caught our Let's Play of Dungeons & Dragons Dark Alliance, you'll recognize Chef the Verbeeg as the fearsome dwarf stew-eating boss that we took on. Ugh, I'm on fire, and not in a good way, I don't think. Today, we're preparing a little home-style dwarf of our own and taking the chef down to size once again, this time with awesome custom miniatures. This is Kitbash Creatures. Presented by Dungeons & Dragons Dark Alliance. Hi there, I'm Max Scoville, and this is Kitbash Creatures, a show all about creating homemade toys from whatever we've got lying around. In our D&D Dark Alliance Let's Play, I did battle with Chef the Verbeeg, the fearsome and disgusting dwarf-eating boss who I really kind of love. And he left such a lasting impression that I want to see him in toy form. And hey, while we're at it, why not make a Bruenor, the dwarf hero that my pal Brian played as?
Here we go. I'm putting in the buff circle. Kick his butt.
After all, it'd be good to have a dwarf on hand in case the chef gets hungry. We reached out to Trent from Miscast, a guy who has plenty of experience creating fantasy miniatures, to see if he's up to the challenge. Trent, how's it going?
Good, how are you?
I'm doing okay. Do you think you're up to the challenge of creating a Bruno the Dwarf and a Chef the Verbeeg for me?
It's going to be a bit of a challenge, but I'm really excited to try something new.
Your general sort of wheelhouse is little tiny 28mm miniatures, but we want something a little bit bigger this time around. How do you think you're going to approach that?
Yeah, I think I'm going to try to find some existing models, maybe even use some big giant bits so they can still be 28mm scale, and sculpt on top of them to sort of bring them up a bit.
I am very excited to see what you come up with.
Thank you. Okay, Bruno, I started with a giant model. Of all models to make a dwarf from, I chose a giant. Using a rotary tool, I hacked him up in an attempt to make him far less tall and a little more dwarven. I thought the giant model would be a good starting place because I'm making Bruno at a larger scale than the small scale that I'm used to, mostly in an attempt to impress Max. I picked this giant model in particular for his nice beard and rugged features, perfect for a dwarf. A two-part modelling epoxy was used to join everything together, with a much shorter profile this time. Modelling epoxy is a two-part clay that you mix together and it goes rock hard in about an hour or two. You can shape it and sand it and make just about anything from it. The secret to using it is water. This will stop your tools from sticking to it and also allow you to smooth the surface out. The trick to sculpting is trying to break down what you want to make into basic shapes and try not to sculpt everything at once. Start simple and work up. I have some images of Bruno on my desk which I'm constantly referring to keep me on track. I wasn't sure how to accomplish Bruno's chainmail, but after some experimenting, I discovered a hair comb made the perfect pattern, which I could then repeat over and over, all over his body. Bruno has some nice Aelstein emblems on his chainmail pelt, so I broke out my freehand sculpting skills to try to make them. They're pretty rough and a little bit cartoony, but I can sand and sharpen them later, or, if need be, cover them up with a carefully placed beard. Speaking of, I've never sculpted a beard before, but I felt an enormous pressure to not mess it up. A beard is very important to a dwarf after all. So I tackled it by breaking it into simple shapes, and then I used an angular pattern to give the illusion that all the strands were plaited together. Then with an Aelstein and a broken horn helmet, this dwarf was starting to look like Bruno. But we need his shield first, which I made from balsa wood, which is a soft, lightweight wood which can be cut with a craft knife. The emblem on the shield was sculpted in epoxy, trying to follow the reference art as close as possible, before adding a liquid putty surface to hide any extra wood grain on the balsa wood I didn't like before painting. We're nearly there, a few more details on the armor, but all I can think about is how to tackle Bruno's axe. Balsa wood and a skewer, I'm thinking, and a bit of epoxy, and a whole lot of sanding. My interpretation of the head of the axe ended up being pretty hefty looking. Maybe a little too hefty looking, but I think Bruno can handle it either way. Painting. A quick base coat of black spray paint and a dusting of white from the top to add some highlights and shadow. Bruno is made of all metal. He's a walking tin can basically, so I wanted to make his silver armor pop and make his brown clothes and fur nice and battle worn. I'm smothering him in washes and glazes of thin paint to add shadow to the crevices and also add some saturation into the armor. By using lots of blue, it really helps tie Bruno in with the snow theme that I'm going to do on his base, which is gravel from my backyard and some hobby snow flock, popular with people in the scale modeling community and model trains, all that sort of stuff. You can find it in any hobby shop. Some final touches of nice gold trim on his armor and Bruno is ready to rock. Okay, let's make the chef. I love making big monsters and the chef is no exception. Starting with another giant model. Yeah, I have some work to do on this one. I've got to add some meat on his bones. The chef has been filling up on dwarf stew after all, and I want to showcase that. I didn't have a big enough model face for the chef, so I ended up cutting up the existing giant face, and then I had to do some creative sculpting to bulk it out a bit. But, you know, he's a big creepy monster, and I think it worked out pretty good. His raggy clothes were made from a rubbery 2-part epoxy, which allowed me to stretch and pull it over his form, making sure to get lots of little tears all over the place. I'm really not being careful at all during this step, because the more wear and tear, the better. To make his massive spear, I used a skewer and a big, chunky, pointy piece of plastic from the giant model before bulking it out to give it some weight. I did the same for the weapon on his back as well. Painting. After a base coat, my goal was to make this guy as dirty and as grimy as possible. Lots of brown and oranges and ashy grey colours as a base coat, and then lots of dark washes to stain all his clothes. Well, rags. I'm certainly going more painterly with this style rather than realistic because I love making a mess, and this guy deserves a mess. I added some red and orange streaks to his skin to show pockets of magma poking through. To finish him off, I added some modeling compound to build up the earth around him, and then I gave him the same snowy treatment as Bruno. And that's it. Let's show Max.
Trent, how's it going, man?
Good, hello. I've got some cool things to show you.
You have some very cool things to show me. You've got a dwarf and you've got a monster. I guess let's start off with the good, and then we'll do the bad and the ugly. Show me that Bruenor.
Yeah, of course. Here he is, all his dwarven glory, his nice gilded armor. Very proud.
Oh, he's a cutie, but he's a tough guy. I know he probably wouldn't want to be called a cutie, but look, I love him. He's just very, very chunky. And walk me through this, because like you work usually on very small miniatures. How did you make a big dwarf?
Yeah, well, I still used a 28mm miniature, but I used a giant model. I thought it'd be sort of funny to turn a dwarf from a giant. And I just hacked it up, added on a few extra dwarven pounds, and here he is.
Now let's talk a little bit about his sort of details and accessories here. His axe and his shield. How did those come together?
Yeah, that's all 2-part epoxy. You mix it up, you put it on there, and it dries within a couple of hours. You can sculpt it, you can sand it. Things like his chainmail, I used a comb and just pressed in a pattern. His shield is a bit of balsa wood. And there's also snow flock and gravel on his base too, which actually came from my backyard. Don't tell my landlord.
I love it. This is great. You're doing found materials and, you know, special hobby polymers and whatnot. Now, show me this chef. I want to see the big monster. You have a talent for monsters.
Ah, well, thank you. Yeah, this guy has a very special place in my heart. He's big, He's ugly, he's dirty, it's my jam.
Oh, I love him. He looks great.
Thank you.
So walk me through kind of what you did here.
Yeah, so I started with another giant as a base, but I definitely had to bulk him out a little bit. He's primarily all hand sculpted. There are a few 3D printed parts on here, which I know might be cheating, but they're ultra realistic and just make him look extra scary.
I was going to dock you some points for that, but I think it works to your advantage, and you showed a lot of restraint. You could have just, gotten a chef model online and just printed the whole thing, but I think the skulls, specifically because of how realistic they are, it makes the rest of him look sort of more monstrous by comparison, and it just immediately establishes his scale. He's a big guy. Now he's filthy. What's going on there?
Yeah, so he has had lots of layers of washes and glazes to build up all that dirt and grime, but also on his underarms, under his chin, there's some pigment powders, which sort of represents all the dirt and grime he's built up fighting and slaving over a hot dwarven stew.
Oh God, extra seasoning. Very nice. Is there a detail in either of these guys you're particularly proud of, or like a little thing that you think really came together well?
Okay, between the two, it's a tough call. I am very proud of Bruno's beard. Not really my expertise, but doing the fancy plaiting was very difficult, but I think it turned out great. And on this big guy, I'm just particularly happy with his face, which I sort of had to hack up from a much smaller one.
They both look great. You clearly put in a ton of work. Now I have some bad news, Trent. We're gonna have to take them away from you and set them free in the wild. We are giving these guys away in a contest.
No.
You're gonna have to kiss them goodbye and pack them a little bag lunch. They're going home with somebody. If you think you could take good care of a dwarf or a verbeeg, we want you to adopt them, and we're having a contest to give them away. That's a nice, humane way to do it. So jump in the video description below, check out the official rules, and maybe you could have a Bruenor or a chef, the Verbeeg. But also, check out Dungeons & Dragons Dark Alliance. It is out now for PlayStation, Xbox, Steam, and Windows Store, and you can find out more at darkalliance.com. And of course, for everything Dungeons, Dragons, miniatures, monsters, all that good stuff, keep it right here on IGN.